Marcus Chen had always been terrible with directions, but, crashing through the crystalline dome of what appeared to be an elaborate alien wedding ceremony while his escape pod burned and sparked around him was definitely a new low. The sleek spacecraft he'd been piloting had suffered a critical engine failure during a routine supply run to the outer colonies, and the emergency beacon had directed him to the nearest habitable planet for an emergency landing. Unfortunately, that landing had been less of a controlled descent and more of a flaming meteor impression straight through the roof of what looked like the most important building on the planet. Steam hissed from his damaged pod as Marcus stumbled out, his standard-issue jumpsuit torn and his dark hair singed from the emergency landing. Around him, dozens of tall, elegant beings with pale blue skin and intricate silver markings covering their faces stared at him in what he assumed was shock. They wore flowing robes that seemed to shimmer with their own internal light, and their large, luminous eyes reflected a spectrum of colors he'd never seen before. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Marcus raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace, his heart pounding against his ribs. The translator device clipped to his collar struggled to process the rapid, musical language being spoken around him, catching fragments that made little sense. Honored guests, his translator finally managed to piece together from the tall figure at the center of the gathering, who wore the most elaborate robes of all. The prophecy speaks truth. The Skywalker has descended to claim his place in the Great Binding. Marcus blinked, his brown eyes scanning the crowd of aliens who had suddenly dropped to their knees in what looked suspiciously like reverence. "I'm sorry, what now?" "Look, I don't mean to interrupt whatever this is, but my ship malfunctioned and I really just need to contact the nearest human outpost for a rescue." The tall figure, who Marcus was beginning to suspect held some position of authority, approached with measured steps. Up close, Marcus could see that the silver markings on their face weren't painted but seemed to be naturally occurring patterns that pulsed with a faint light. Their voice, when they spoke, carried a weight of ceremony that made Marcus's stomach drop. "I am High Celebrant Vexhai of the Luminari. For 7 cycles, we have awaited the arrival of the Chosen One, he who would fall from the stars to complete the sacred union with Princess Zara Lynn." The celebrant gestured to a figure seated on what could only be described as a throne made of living crystal. The ancient text spoke of one who would arrive in fire and chaos, bearing the marks of a distant world. Marcus followed the gesture and felt his breath catch. Princess Zara Lynn was undeniably beautiful, even by alien standards. Her blue skin held an almost ethereal glow, and the silver markings across her face formed intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story he couldn't read. Her eyes, a deep violet that seemed to hold the depth of space itself, were fixed on him with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step backward. "This has to be some kind of misunderstanding," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly in panic. "I'm just a cargo pilot. I haul supplies between colonies. I don't know anything about prophecies or sacred unions or any of this." The princess rose from her throne with fluid grace, her robes trailing behind her like liquid starlight. When she spoke, her voice was melodious but carried an edge of steel. "The prophecy does not lie, Skywalker. You have arrived at the moment of the Great Binding, having fallen from the heavens as foretold. The signs are clear." "What signs?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. High Celebrant Vexhai gestured to Marcus's appearance. "You bear the mark of fire upon your hair, as the texts describe. Your vessel brought you in flame and destruction, crashing through the sacred dome at the precise moment when the twin moons align. Your skin bears the pale color of the sky realm, and your eyes hold the brown of fertile earth." Marcus ran a hand through his singed hair, suddenly aware that every eye in the vast chamber was upon him. The architecture around them was breathtaking, all flowing curves and surfaces that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. Thousands of luminari filled the space, their collective gaze making his skin crawl with nervous energy. "Listen," Marcus said, trying to inject as much reason into his voice as possible, "I appreciate that you have your traditions and your prophecies, but I'm not whoever you think I am. I'm human. From Earth. We're not even part of your galaxy cluster. This is all just a really, really bad coincidence." Princess Zara Lynn moved closer, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and exotic flowers. "The prophecy speaks of one from beyond the known stars, Marcus Chen of Earth." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "How do you know my name?" A smile played at the corners of the princess's lips, though whether it was amused or predatory, Marcus couldn't tell. The sacred texts are quite specific. They named the Skywalker who would come to fulfill the prophecy. Marcus Chan, pilot of the vessel designated Cargo 7742, born in the Earth year you call 2387, son of Dr. Sarah Chan and engineer David Chen. The gathered luminari began to murmur among themselves, their musical language creating a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Marcus felt dizzy, and not just from the crash landing. That's impossible. How could your people possibly know who I am? We've never made contact with your species before. High Celebrant Vexhai stepped forward, their luminous eyes reflecting the strange light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The Luminari have been blessed with the gift of farsight for millennia. Our seers have watched the threads of time and space, following the paths that would lead to this moment. Your arrival was foreseen long before your species had learned to leave their home world. Marcus shook his head, trying to process what he was hearing. So you're telling me that your people somehow predicted that I, specifically, would crash land during your princess's wedding ceremony? Not during, Princess Zaralyn corrected, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been amusement. The ceremony you interrupted was my wedding ceremony. To you. The world seemed to tilt around Marcus. He looked around the chamber with new eyes, taking in details he'd missed in his initial panic. The elaborate decorations, the formal seating arrangements, the altar-like structure at the center where Princess Zaralyn had been standing when he crashed through the roof. This wasn't just any ceremony. This was a wedding, and, according to these people, he was the groom. But, that's insane, Marcus protested weakly. You can't just decide to marry someone because they crash-landed during your ceremony. That's not how marriage works. High Celebrant Vexhai's expression grew solemn. Among the Luminari, the sacred union is not merely a joining of two individuals, but a binding that affects the fate of our entire species. The prophecy foretells that only through the union of the Skywalker and Princess Zaralyn can our people be saved from the great darkness that approaches. Great darkness? Marcus asked, though part of him suspected he was already in over his head. Princess Zaralyn moved to stand beside her throne, her hand resting on what Marcus now realized was some kind of ceremonial artifact. It pulsed with the same ethereal light as the markings on her skin. Our seers have seen it in their visions. A force that devours light itself, consuming star systems and leaving nothing but void in its wake. It moves toward our galaxy, and only the power generated by the sacred union can hope to stop it. Marcus felt a laugh bubble up from his chest, though it came out more like a choke sound. So let me get this straight. You want me to marry your princess to help fight some cosmic horror that's eating the galaxy? Not want, High Celebrant Vexhai corrected. Need. The prophecy is not a suggestion, Skywalker. It is destiny. Marcus looked around the chamber again, taking in the faces of the gathered Luminari. Where he'd expected to see joy or celebration appropriate for a wedding, he saw something else entirely. Fear. Hope. Desperation. These weren't people celebrating a happy occasion. These were people placing their last hope in an ancient prophecy and a human cargo pilot who'd stumbled into their most sacred ceremony by accident. Princess Zaralyn seemed to sense his thoughts. I know this is not what you expected when you began your day, Marcus Chen. It is not what I expected either. But the fate of billions rests upon this union, and I will not see my people consumed by darkness because of doubt or fear. Your people, Marcus said slowly. What about my people? What about humanity? I have a life, responsibilities, people who care about me. You can't just expect me to abandon all of that because your prophecy says so. The princess's expression softened slightly. The prophecy speaks of sacrifice, Skywalker. But it also speaks of great power and the salvation of countless worlds. Your people would be protected as well, should you choose to accept your destiny? Marcus sank down onto a piece of debris from his escape pod, his head spinning with the impossibility of the situation. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether the protein synthesizers in the cargo hold would stay online long enough to reach the Kepler colony. Now he was apparently supposed to marry an alien princess and help save the galaxy from some unknowable cosmic threat. I need time to think, Marcus said finally. This is all happening too fast. I just crashed here 15 minutes ago, and now you're telling me I'm supposed to be part of some cosmic destiny. High Celebrant Vexhai exchanged a look with Princess Zaralyn. Time is a luxury we do not possess, Skywalker. The great darkness draws closer with each passing day, and the sacred union must be completed when the twin moons reach their apex. That occurs in 3 days' time. 3 days? Marcus's voice cracked. You want me to decide whether to marry someone I just met and take on the responsibility for saving the galaxy in 3 days? Princess Zaralyn moved closer, and Marcus was struck again by the otherworldly grace of her movement. I understand your reluctance, Marcus Chen. But, consider this, you were brought here by more than mere chance. Your ship's malfunction, the trajectory that brought you to this exact place at this exact time, the fact that your name was written in our sacred texts thousands of years before your birth. Do you truly believe all of this is coincidence? Marcus wanted to say yes, that it was all just a series of incredibly unlikely events that had no deeper meaning. But, as he looked around the chamber, at the faces of the luminary who watched him with such desperate hope, at the princess whose violet eyes seemed to see straight through to his soul, he found that certainty slipping away. What if I can't do it? Marcus asked quietly. What if I'm not whoever your prophecy thinks I am? What if I mess this up and everyone dies anyway? Princess Zaralyn knelt beside him, her presence bringing a strange sense of calm despite the chaos of the situation. Then, we will face that darkness together, and know that we tried. But, Marcus Chen, I have seen the way you carry yourself, the strength in your eyes despite your fear. The prophecy did not choose you by accident. Marcus looked up at her, seeing something in her expression that went beyond duty or destiny. There was a person behind the title and the ceremony, someone who was just as afraid as he was but who was willing to do whatever it took to save her people. If I agree to this, Marcus said slowly, what exactly would it involve? This sacred union. High Celebrant Vexhai stepped forward. The ceremony itself binds not just your spirits, but your life forces. You would share in Princess Zaralyn's extended lifespan, and she would gain access to the unique properties that make humans so adaptable and resilient. Together, you would be able to channel energies that neither of your species could access alone. And this power would be enough to stop the Great Darkness? The prophecy suggests it would be enough to challenge it, Princess Zaralyn said carefully. Victory is not guaranteed, but without the sacred union, defeat certainly is. Marcus stood up slowly, his legs still shaky from the crash and the revelation. Around him, the luminary waited in silence, their entire future hanging on the decision of a human cargo pilot who'd stumbled into their prophecy by accident. I need to see this great darkness for myself, Marcus said finally. If I'm going to make a decision that affects the fate of the galaxy, I need to understand what we're really facing. Princess Zaralyn nodded. The seers can share their visions with you, but, I warn you, Marcus Chen. Once you have seen the true scope of what approaches, there will be no returning to the simple life you knew before. Marcus looked around the chamber one more time, at the crashed remains of his escape pod, at the faces of the luminary who had placed their hope in an ancient prophecy and a human who'd never asked for any of this responsibility. I think that ship has already sailed, Marcus said with a weak smile. Or crashed, as the case may be. As High Celebrant Vexhai began preparations for the vision-sharing ceremony, Marcus caught Princess Zaralyn watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was gratitude there, certainly, but also something that looked almost like sympathy. He had the distinct feeling that whatever he was about to see would change everything, and that the choice he thought he was making was really no choice at all. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and, somehow, impossibly, it all depended on a human cargo pilot and an alien princess who were supposed to save everyone by getting married. Marcus Chen had definitely had better days. The vision chamber was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The walls seemed to be made of the same living crystal as Princess Zaralyn's throne, but these surfaces moved and shifted like water, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. High Celebrant Vexhai had led them deep beneath the ceremonial dome, through corridors that pulsed with bioluminescent veins of light, to a spherical room where the laws of physics seemed more like gentle suggestions. Marcus floated in the center of the chamber, held in place by some force he couldn't understand, while Princess Zaralyn and 3 other luminary seers arranged themselves at equal points around the sphere's circumference. Their markings had begun to glow more brightly, creating intricate patterns of light that danced across the crystal walls. The visions of the great darkness are not easy to bear, even for our kind, Princess Zaralyn warned, her voice echoing strangely in the crystal space. For a human mind, the experience may be overwhelming. If you need us to stop the connection at any point, you need only speak. Marcus nodded, trying to ignore the way his stomach was doing flips in the zero-gravity environment. I've seen some pretty terrible things in my time hauling cargo to the Outer Rim colonies. Pirates, plague worlds, failed terraforming projects. How bad can it be? The seers began to chant in their musical language, and Marcus felt something touch the edges of his consciousness. It was gentle at first, like fingers trailing across his mind, but then, the vision began and Marcus understood why Princess Zaralyn had warned him. The darkness was alive. That was the first horrifying realization as Marcus found himself seeing through the eyes of luminary seers across thousands of years. The great darkness wasn't just the absence of light or some cosmic phenomenon. It was a vast, intelligent entity that existed in the spaces between stars, feeding on the energy of entire solar systems. Marcus watched in growing horror as star after star went dark, their light literally consumed by tendrils of absolute blackness that seemed to exist outside normal space. Entire civilizations winked out of existence in moments as the creature passed through their systems, leaving behind nothing but empty void where thriving worlds had once orbited living suns. But, worse than the destruction was the intelligence behind it. As the vision continued, Marcus caught glimpses of the entity's thoughts, alien and vast beyond human comprehension. It wasn't destroying these worlds out of malice or hunger as a biological creature might understand those concepts. It was simply returning the universe to what it considered a proper state, empty, silent, and dark. It's old, Marcus gasped, his voice barely audible in the crystal chamber. Older than everything. It thinks all this light, all this life, is some kind of mistake that needs to be corrected. Princess Zaralyn's voice reached him through the vision connection. Now you begin to understand. The entity has been moving through distant galaxies for eons, correcting what it sees as the error of existence itself. Our seers first detected its approach 50 years ago, but it has been heading toward this galaxy cluster for far longer. The vision shifted, showing Marcus the current position of the Great Darkness. It was still several light years away, but space itself seemed to bend around it, and stars that were nowhere near its current location were already beginning to dim. The entity's presence was so vast that it affected reality across impossible distances. How long do we have? Marcus asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. At its current rate of approach, perhaps 6 months before it reaches the outer systems of our galaxy, came the voice of one of the other seers. Less if it decides to accelerate its movement. The vision changed again, and Marcus saw something that made him cry out in shock. Earth. His homeworld was visible in the cosmic display, along with all the human colonies and outposts scattered across their small section of space. They looked so small and fragile against the backdrop of the approaching darkness. Your people would be among the first consumed, Princess Zaralyn said gently. The entity's path will take it directly through human space before it reaches the core worlds of the Luminari. Marcus felt tears he didn't remember shedding floating in the zero gravity around him. All of human civilization, everything his species had built and accomplished, would be snuffed out like candles in a hurricane. His parents, his friends, his fellow pilots, the billions of people living their lives across dozens of worlds, all of them would die screaming into the void as their very existence was erased. Show me the prophecy, Marcus said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Show me how this sacred union is supposed to stop something like that. The vision shifted once more, and Marcus found himself looking at what could only be described as a map of cosmic forces. The universe, he saw, was not just matter and energy as human science understood it. There were currents of power that flowed between stars, connections that bound all living things together in a vast web of existence. The Great Darkness was able to consume light and life because it existed outside this web, feeding on the connections themselves and severing the bonds that held reality together. But the sacred union between human and Luminari would create something new, a bridging force that could strengthen those cosmic connections and create barriers the entity couldn't simply consume. Humans are unique among the species we've encountered, Princess Zaralyn explained as Marcus watched the cosmic forces swirl around him. Your people have an unusual relationship with what you might call possibility. You exist slightly outside the normal flow of causality, which is why your species has been able to adapt and spread so quickly across space. And the Luminari? We exist deeply within the cosmic web. Our connection to the fundamental forces of reality is what gives us our longevity and our ability to see across time and space. Alone, neither of our species can challenge the great darkness. But, together. The vision showed him the potential of their union. Marcus saw himself and Princess Zaralyn standing together, their combined life forces creating a beacon of power that could pierce even the absolute darkness of the entity. But, more than that, their union would create a template that could be replicated, allowing other species to forge similar connections and create a network of resistance across the galaxy. It's not just about saving our people, Marcus realized. It's about teaching the whole galaxy how to fight back. The prophecy speaks of the Skywalker as the first, but not the last. High Celebrant Vexhi's voice joined the conversation. Your union with Princess Zaralyn would be the beginning of a new age of cooperation between species, all united against the great darkness. The vision began to fade, and Marcus found himself back in the crystal chamber, his feet touching solid ground once more. The seers looked drained from the effort of sharing their sight, but Princess Zaralyn was watching him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. Now you have seen the truth of what we face, she said. What is your answer, Marcus Chen of Earth? Marcus ran his hands through his hair, still processing everything he'd witnessed. The scope of the threat was beyond anything he could have imagined, but, at the same time, the solution seemed almost absurdly simple. Get married to an alien princess and save the galaxy through the power of love and cooperation. There's something I need to know, Marcus said. This union, this marriage, what would it actually be like? I saw the cosmic forces and the prophecy, but what about the day-to-day reality? Would we actually be, married? Princess Zaralyn's cheeks took on a slightly deeper blue color, which Marcus suspected might be the Luminari equivalent of blushing. The sacred union creates bonds of spirit and energy, but, yes, it would also be a marriage in the traditional sense. We would be partners in all things, sharing our lives as well as our power. Do you want this? Marcus asked bluntly. I mean, setting aside the prophecy and the fate of the galaxy, do you want to marry a human cargo pilot you just met? The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, the regal composure slipped, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the person beneath the title. I have spent my entire life preparing for this moment, she said slowly. I was raised knowing that my marriage would not be a choice but a duty to my people. But, if I am being honest, I had hoped. What did you hope? Princess Zaralyn looked away, her hands clasping and unclasping nervously. I had hoped that when the Skywalker arrived, there would be some connection between us beyond mere prophecy. Some sign that we were compatible as individuals, not just as cosmic forces. Marcus studied her profile, noting the elegant line of her neck, the way her markings seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. And, is there? A connection, I mean? She turned to meet his gaze, and, for a moment, Marcus felt something pass between them. It might have been the lingering effects of the vision sharing, or it might have been simple human attraction to someone who was undeniably beautiful, even by alien standards. But, there was something there, a spark of genuine interest that had nothing to do with prophecies or cosmic destiny. I find myself curious about you, Marcus Chen, Princess Zaralyn said softly. You crashed through our most sacred ceremony, learned that the fate of the galaxy rested on your shoulders, and your first concern was whether I wanted this marriage to be real. That speaks to a character that intrigues me. Yeah, well, Marcus said, feeling heat rise in his cheeks, I've never been good at doing things the easy way. High Celebrant Vexhi cleared their throat, reminding them that they weren't alone in the chamber. Forgive the interruption, but there are practical matters that must be addressed. If the sacred union is to be performed, there are preparations that cannot wait. Marcus looked around the crystal chamber one more time, then, at Princess Zaralyn's hopeful expression. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical thing, but, beneath it, he found something he hadn't expected, a sense of rightness. Maybe it was destiny, or maybe it was just the human instinct to protect what mattered, but Marcus knew what his answer had to be. All right, Marcus said, his voice stronger than he felt. Let's save the galaxy. Princess Zara Lynn's face lit up with a smile that transformed her from beautiful to radiant. Then, we have much work to do and little time to do it. The sacred union ceremony is complex, and there are rituals you must learn. What kind of rituals? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect that was a question he probably should have asked before agreeing to anything. Nothing too strenuous, Princess Zara Lynn assured him, though there was a gleam in her violet eyes that suggested she was enjoying his growing nervousness. You will need to learn the 13 sacred vows, master the basic harmonics of luminary bonding songs, and undergo the purification of intent. That doesn't sound too bad, Marcus said cautiously. Oh, and you'll need to survive the trial of cosmic resonance, High Celebrant Vexhai added helpfully. But, don't worry, the survival rate is nearly 60% for off-worlders. Marcus stared at them. 60%? What happens to the other 40%? Princess Zara Lynn placed a comforting hand on his arm. They usually recover their sanity within a few years. The important thing is that the cosmic forces accept you as a suitable partner for the sacred union. And, if they don't accept me? Then, the wedding proceeds anyway, Princess Zara Lynn said cheerfully, but the resulting explosion tends to level several city blocks. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, Princess Zara Lynn was still smiling at him, and he found himself smiling back despite everything. You know what? Marcus said. 60% odds and possible insanity still sound better than letting the galaxy get eaten by cosmic horror. When do we start? As High Celebrant Vexhai began outlining the preparation schedule, Marcus caught Princess Zara Lynn watching him with an expression of growing respect. Maybe this crazy plan would actually work. Maybe a human cargo pilot and an alien princess really could save the galaxy together. Or maybe they'd die trying, but at least they wouldn't die alone. Either way, Marcus thought as he followed Princess Zara Lynn out of the crystal chamber, his life had definitely taken a turn for the interesting. Now he just had to hope he could survive long enough to see how it all turned out. The trial of cosmic resonance turned out to be exactly as terrifying as advertised. Marcus stood in the center of what the Luminari called the Harmony Chamber, a vast spherical room lined with crystals that hummed with frequencies that made his bones ache. Princess Zara Lynn watched from behind a protective barrier along with High Celebrant Vexhai and several other important-looking Luminari officials, their expressions ranging from hopeful to deeply concerned. Remember, Princess Zara Lynn called out, her voice somehow carrying clearly over the increasingly intense harmonic vibrations, do not fight the resonance. Allow it to flow through you. The cosmic forces are testing whether your spirit can harmonize with mine. Marcus nodded, though his teeth were starting to chatter from the vibrations. 2 days of intensive preparation had taught him the basic theory, but theory and practice were proving to be very different things. The crystals around him were beginning to glow brighter, and he could feel something vast and alien pressing against the edges of his consciousness. What am I supposed to do if it doesn't work? Marcus shouted over the growing noise. Duck! Princess Zara Lynn shouted back helpfully. Before Marcus could ask what exactly he was supposed to duck from, the cosmic forces hit him like a freight train. The universe exploded into sensation and Marcus found himself experiencing existence from perspectives that human minds weren't designed to handle. He was simultaneously a single point of consciousness and spread across light years of space. He could feel the heartbeat of stars and the slow dance of galaxies, while at the same time being acutely aware of the individual thoughts of microscopic organisms on distant worlds. Through it all, he felt Princess Zara Lynn's presence like an anchor in the chaos. Her consciousness was vast and ancient compared to his, shaped by centuries of life and connection to cosmic forces, but there was something warm and fundamentally caring at its core that reminded him why he'd agreed to this insanity in the first place. The resonance test wasn't just about surviving the connection to universal forces. It was about proving that two fundamentally different beings could share that connection without destroying each other. Marcus felt his human adaptability stretching to accommodate powers that no member of his species had ever touched, while simultaneously feeling Princess Zara Lynn's cosmic awareness learning to appreciate the fierce, burning intensity of human determination. For a moment that lasted both an instant and an eternity, Marcus understood everything. He saw the thread of causality that had brought him to this moment, stretching back through thousands of years of carefully orchestrated events. His ship's malfunction hadn't been an accident. The trajectory that brought him to this exact place at this exact time had been guided by forces beyond his comprehension, all to create this one perfect moment of connection. Then, the crystals around him began to crack. Marcus snapped back to his own consciousness to find the harmony chamber filled with blinding light and a sound like reality tearing. Several of the resonance crystals had shattered completely, and the rest were beginning to show hairline fractures that spread even as he watched. "Is this normal?" Marcus yelled, ducking as a chunk of crystal the size of his fist whistled past his head. "Not exactly." High Celebrant Vexhai replied, consulting what appeared to be an ancient text while simultaneously dodging falling debris. "The records speak of unusual manifestations when the cosmic forces fully accept a candidate, but this level of property damage is unprecedented." Princess Zaralyn pressed herself against the barrier separating them, her eyes wide with amazement and something that might have been pride. "Marcus, can you feel it? The connection?" Marcus took inventory of his sensations and realized he could indeed feel something new. There was a warmth in his chest that hadn't been there before, and, when he focused on Princess Zaralyn, he could sense her emotions as clearly as if they were his own. The wonder, the relief, the growing affection that she was trying to keep professional. "Yeah," Marcus said, grinning despite the chaos around him. "I can feel it." The light began to fade and the crystal fractures stopped spreading. In the sudden quiet, Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, but underneath it, he could also feel the steady rhythm of Princess Zaralyn's dual hearts. They were connected now in a way that went beyond anything either of their species had experienced before. "Well," High Celebrant Vexhai said, surveying the damage to their sacred chamber, "I believe we can safely say the cosmic forces approve of this union." The wedding ceremony itself was surprisingly beautiful, once they moved it to a chamber that wasn't currently filled with broken crystals. The Luminari had rebuilt their ceremonial dome with remarkable efficiency, and thousands of guests from across their worlds had gathered to witness what they considered the most important event in their species' history. Marcus stood at the altar wearing ceremonial robes that had been hastily adjusted for his human physiology, trying not to think about the fact that representatives from dozens of other alien species were watching from the audience. Apparently, word had spread quickly through the local galactic community about the prophesied union, and everyone wanted to see whether two different species really could create a force capable of challenging the Great Darkness. Princess Zaralyn entered the chamber in a gown that seemed to be woven from starlight itself, and Marcus felt his breath catch. The connection they'd forged during the trial of cosmic resonance meant he could feel her nervousness beneath her regal composure, but he could also feel her determination and her growing hope that this impossible plan might actually work. "You clean up pretty well for someone who crashed through our roof 3 days ago," she murmured as she took her place beside him. "You're not looking too bad yourself, Princess," Marcus replied, earning himself a smile that made the silver markings on her face pulse with warm light. High Celebrant Vexhai began the ceremony in the ancient language of the Luminari, but Marcus found he could understand every word. The cosmic connection had opened his mind to more than just Princess Zaralyn's emotions. It had given him access to the deeper meanings behind her people's most sacred traditions. The 13 sacred vows were promises that bound not just their lives but their very essences together. They pledged to share their strengths and support each other through their weaknesses, to stand together against any force that threatened either of their peoples, and to create something new and better from the union of their different natures. When it came time for Marcus to speak his vows, he found himself saying words he didn't remember learning, ancient phrases that resonated with power even as his human accent made them sound slightly ridiculous. "I, Marcus Chin of Earth, take you, Princess Zaralyn of the Luminari, to be my partner in all things. I offer you my adaptability in exchange for your wisdom, my determination in exchange for your grace, my brief bright flame in exchange for your eternal light. Together we will be more than either could be alone." Princess Zaralyn's vows were spoken in harmonics that made the air itself shimmer, and Marcus felt their meaning directly through their connection rather than understanding them with his ears. She promised to share her long life with his brief intensity, to ground his human chaos with her cosmic stability, to be both anchor and sail for whatever journeys lay ahead. When High Celebrant Vexhai pronounced them bound by the sacred union, the light that erupted from their joined hands was visible from orbit. Every person in the chamber felt the wave of power that washed over them, a sensation of connection and hope that left many of the alien delegates weeping openly. But Marcus only had eyes for his new wife, watching the wonder and joy spread across her face as she felt their bond settle into place. They were married now in every sense that mattered, joined by forces that transcended anything either of their species had previously understood. "So," Princess Zaralyn said as the light faded and the cheering began, "what do we do now?" Marcus grinned and squeezed her hand, feeling the cosmic power flowing between them like electricity. "Now we save the galaxy. How hard can it be?" The answer, as it turned out, was considerably harder than either of them had expected. The Great Darkness had accelerated its approach, apparently sensing the new force that opposed it. What should have been 6 months of preparation time had been compressed to 6 weeks, and the entity was already consuming the outer edge of human space. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Luminary flagship, watching through the viewscreen as entire solar systems went dark. Each lost star felt like a physical blow through his enhanced senses, and he could feel Princess Zaralyn's matching anguish through their bond. "The evacuation fleets can't move fast enough," reported Captain Threndell, the Luminary naval commander who had been placed in charge of the combined human-alien defense force. "We're losing 3 systems for every one we managed to clear." "Then, we stop running," Marcus said, his voice carrying a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "It's time to make our stand." Princess Zaralyn moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his automatically. Through their connection, Marcus could feel her accessing the cosmic side of her people, watching the flow of forces across space and time. "There," she said, pointing to a seemingly empty region of space between the approaching darkness and the populated systems. "We can create a barrier there, using the gravitational fields of the binary pulsars to anchor our power." Marcus nodded, understanding her plan through their shared consciousness. They would use their combined abilities to create a wall of reinforced reality, strengthening the cosmic connections in that region of space to the point where even the Great Darkness couldn't simply consume them. It was an insane plan that had never been attempted before and would require them to channel more power than any beings in the galaxy had ever wielded. It would either save billions of lives or kill them both in a spectacular explosion that would probably be visible from the next galaxy over. "I love it when we go with the simple plans," Marcus said with a grin. The battle, when it finally came, was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. The Great Darkness arrived at their makeshift battlefield like a tide of absolute void, its presence bending space itself and causing stars to flicker out just from proximity. Marcus and Princess Zaralyn stood together in the center of a crystalline platform that had been constructed specifically to channel their combined power. Around them, ships from a dozen different species waited to provide what support they could, but everyone understood that this fight would ultimately come down to the 2 figures glowing with cosmic energy at the center of it all. "Ready?" Princess Zaralyn asked, her voice calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. "No," Marcus replied honestly. "But, let's do it anyway." They joined hands and opened themselves fully to the cosmic forces flowing through their bond. Power beyond description coursed through them, the combined might of human adaptability and luminary cosmic connection creating something that had never existed before in the history of the universe. The barrier they created was beautiful and terrible, a wall of crystallized reality that stretched across light years and pulsed with the fundamental frequencies of existence itself. When the Great Darkness struck it, the impact sent shockwaves through dimensions that hadn't been touched by anything material in eons. For a moment, Marcus thought they had failed. The entity was vast beyond imagination, and their barrier seemed pathetically small in comparison. But then, he felt other connections forming, other species across the galaxy who had witnessed their example and were attempting to forge their own unions of power. The barrier held, then, began to grow stronger as more and more worlds added their strength to the network Marcus and Princess Zaralyn had started. What had begun as a desperate last stand became a rallying point for every species in the galaxy, all of them united in their refusal to let the darkness consume everything they had built. The Great Darkness, for the first time in its ancient existence, found itself facing resistance it couldn't simply overwhelm. The cosmic connections it fed on had been reinforced beyond its ability to sever them, and the network of unified species was growing stronger with every passing moment. In the end, the entity didn't retreat so much as withdraw to consider this new development. The immediate threat was over, but Marcus knew through his enhanced senses that this was only the beginning of a much longer war. "We did it," Princess Zaralyn breathed, exhaustion and exhilaration warring in her voice. "We actually did it." Marcus pulled her into his arms, feeling the warmth of her dual hearts against his chest and the steady flow of cosmic power through their bond. We did. Though I have a feeling the hard part is just beginning. Princess Zaralyn laughed, a sound like silver bells that made their platform ring with sympathetic harmonics. Marcus Chen, when we first met, I never imagined I would find myself looking forward to the hard parts. Well, Marcus said, spinning her around as the cheers from the assembled fleet reached them across space. Stick with me, princess. I promise to make sure your life is never boring. As they watched the great darkness fade into the distance, defeated for now but not destroyed, Marcus reflected on the incredible chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A simple engine malfunction had led to the most important marriage in galactic history, and a cargo pilot who had never wanted anything more complicated than a steady paycheck had become one half of the force that saved civilization itself. It wasn't the life he had planned, but, as he held his alien wife and felt the grateful thoughts of billions of beings through their cosmic connection, Marcus decided it might just be the life he had always been meant to live. After all, someone had to crash the wedding and marry the princess. It might as well be him.